What happens when a woman with nothing left to lose crosses paths with the city's most dangerous man? They say the underworld shows no mercy, but when struggling single mother Alice Hayes was held at gunpoint to save a mafia boss's paralyzed daughter. She didn't just save a life, she sparked a miracle that brought a criminal empire to its knees. This is a story of betrayal, deadly secrets, and a love so forbidden it ignited a mob war. Listen closely, because the truth of what happened next will shock you. The neon sign of St. Jude's Community Clinic flickered with a persistent, annoying buzz, casting a sickly green light over the deserted waiting room. It was 11:45 p.m. on a torrential Tuesday night in the poorest district of Chicago. Alice Hayes sat behind the cracked plexiglass of the reception desk, meticulously counting a handful of dimes and quarters, $32.40. It still wasn't enough for the premium asthma inhaler her 5-year-old son Leo desperately needed. Alice was 28, but the deep violet circles under her eyes aged her by a decade. She was an overqualified physical therapy assistant who had dropped out of her clinical doctorate program when her husband walked out, leaving her drowning in medical debt and a high-risk pregnancy. Now she worked the graveyard shift at a rundown clinic, patching up knife wounds and dispensing antibiotics to people who couldn't afford questions. The storm outside raged, the rain lashing against the reinforced glass doors. Suddenly, the shadows in the parking lot shifted. The heavy double doors were violently kicked open, shattering the lock. 3 men rushed in, bringing the freezing storm with them. They were dressed in impeccably tailored soaking wet suits, their eyes scanning the room with predatory efficiency. But it was the man in the center who pulled all the oxygen from the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding a terrifying aura of absolute authority, Vincent Moretti did not walk. He commanded space. In his arms, he carried a small, fragile bundle wrapped in a dark cashmere trench coat. Where is the doctor? Vincent's voice was a low, jagged rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. It held no panic, only a lethal simmering rage. Dr. Aris Mitchell, the clinic's exhausted resident physician, stumbled out of the break room, a half-eaten sandwich falling from his hand. We're closed, he stammered, freezing, as one of the suited men silently pulled back the side of his jacket, revealing the dull gleam of a suppressed automatic weapon. You are open, Vincent stated coldly, striding past Alice and laying the bundle onto the nearest examination table. He pulled back the coat. A little girl no older than 7 lay there. Her frail body was locked in a terrifying state of rigid spasticity. Her back was arched in a severe bow, her tiny hands clenched so tightly into fists that her knuckles were bone white. Her lips were turning a dangerous shade of cerulean blue, and she was letting out high-pitched, agonizing gasps that barely pulled in any air. She has a cervical spinal injury from trauma 2 years ago, severe neurological misfires. Her diaphragm is locking up. Vincent barked, his steely eyes locked onto the doctor. Fix it, now, or you won't live to see the sunrise. Dr. Mitchell rushed forward with a stethoscope, his hands shaking so violently he dropped it. I need to administer a heavy muscle relaxant, maybe intubate. But I don't have pediatric dosages of propofol here. This is a walk-in clinic. Then figure it out! Vincent roared, the sheer force of his voice making the glass vials in the cabinets rattle. The little girl let out a choked, breathless whimper, her eyes rolling back. Alice watched from the desk. She recognized the specific type of neuromuscular lockup. Muscle relaxants would drop her blood pressure too fast. Intubation without proper anesthesia in her state could cause vocal cord paralysis. Her grandfather, a pioneer in holistic pediatric neuromuscular therapy, had taught her an archaic, highly specialized technique for this exact crisis before he passed. Before her brain could process the danger, Alice's maternal instincts took over. She shoved the plexiglass door open and marched into the trauma bay. Step aside, Aris. Alice said, her voice surprisingly steady. Vincent's men instantly raised their weapons, aiming directly at Alice's chest. Vincent raised a single-gloved hand, silencing them, his dark eyes narrowing at this sudden intrusion. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the person who's going to keep your daughter from suffocating while your gorillas wave guns around." Alice snapped back, shocking herself with her audacity. She didn't wait for his permission. She stepped up to the table. "If you hurt her, I will end you." Vincent whispered a promise of sheer violence. Alice ignored him. She stripped off her clinic jacket and laid her warm hands bare on the freezing, rigid skin of the little girl's neck. She closed her eyes, feeling for the hardened, inflamed nerve clusters along the cervical spine. Her vagus nerve is misfiring, sending a continuous contraction signal to her intercostal muscles. Alice explained rapidly, more to herself than them. Using her thumbs, Alice applied intense, agonizingly precise pressure to 2 points right at the base of the girl's skull, while her fingers wrapped around the jawline. "I need you to hold her legs flat," she commanded Vincent. The Mafia boss hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying, his massive hands gently pinning his daughter's trembling knees. Alice began a rhythmic, forceful massage moving down the spine, tracing the specific nerve pathways. She leaned close to the girl's ear. "I know it hurts, sweetheart. I know it's scary. But I need you to breathe with me, in through the nose. Follow my voice." For 3 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The men in the room shifted, hands tight on their triggers. Vincent's jaw was clenched so hard it looked carved from granite. But Alice didn't stop. She adjusted her grip, finding the exact knot of spastic muscle beneath the shoulder blade and driving the heel of her hand into it with calculated force. Suddenly, a loud pop echoed in the quiet room. The girl's spine abruptly unbowed. A massive, shuddering intake of air rushed into the child's lungs. The rigid fists slowly uncurled. The blue tint began to fade from her lips, replaced by a flush of healthy pink. The little girl blinked her dark eyes, focusing on Alice, tears spilling down her cheeks. "There you go." Alice breathed, her own legs trembling as the adrenaline crashed. She stroked the girl's damp hair. "You're safe." Vincent stood frozen, staring at his daughter, who was now breathing normally, then slowly shifted his gaze to the woman in the faded green scrubs. The murderous intent in his eyes was replaced by something entirely different, profound, calculated calculation. He didn't say a word of thanks. He merely gestured to his men. One of them stepped forward, dropping a thick stack of $100 bills onto the reception desk. Vincent carefully picked up his daughter, wrapped her back in the cashmere coat, and looked back at Alice. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone no longer a threat, but a demand for a fact he intended to keep. "Alice," she answered, holding her ground, despite the trembling in her knees. Vincent gave a curt nod. "Alice." He tasted the name, his eyes lingering on her face for a second too long. Then he turned and vanished into the stormy night, leaving Alice standing in the sterile light, entirely unaware that her life had just irrevocably changed. 3 days later, the miracle at the clinic felt like a fever dream. The stack of cash Vincent had left covered 2 months of back rent and one of Leo's specialized inhalers, but the relief was aggressively temporary. Alice sat at her cramped kitchen table in her second-floor walk-up, staring at the bright pink eviction warning taped to her door. Beside it lay a letter from the Children's Hospital. Leo's latest pulmonary workup was not covered by her state-issued insurance. The total was staggering, a number so high it made her physically nauseous. From the tiny bedroom, the sound of a harsh, rattling cough echoed. Alice closed her eyes, fighting back the sting of tears. "Mommy's coming, Leo," she called out, plastering a brave smile on her face as she walked into his room. Her son, pale and tiny for his age, sat up in bed, clutching his stuffed bear. "Is my chest going to hurt again today, Mommy?" he asked softly. Alice sat on the edge of the mattress, pulling him into her arms. "No, baby. Mommy's got a plan. Everything's going to be okay." It was a lie. She had no plan. She had sold her wedding ring, her car, and pawned her grandfather's antique watch. She was out of moves. The next morning, Alice walked Leo to his subsidized daycare, her mind racing with desperate ideas. Maybe she could take a third job cleaning offices at night. As she turned the corner down a narrow, rain-slicked alleyway to cut toward the bus stop, a massive midnight black Lincoln Town car silently pulled up, blocking her path. Alice froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The rear door clicked open. A man stepped out, one of the impeccably dressed enforcers from the clinic. He was built like a heavyweight boxer, but carried himself with terrifying grace. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice polite but leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Mr. Moretti would like a word." "I don't have anything else to give you," Alice said, taking a step back, her hands balling into fists. "Tell him to leave me alone." "It is not a request, ma'am. Please, get in the car." He gestured to the open door. Alice saw another man stepping out of the passenger side, casually resting his hand on the lapel of his jacket. She had a son. She couldn't afford to be a martyr in an alleyway. With a deep breath, she slid into the leather-scented interior of the vehicle. The drive lasted nearly an hour, taking them far from the gritty streets of the South Side and up into the winding private roads of the affluent northern bluffs. They pulled up to a set of imposing wrought iron gates that swung open to reveal a sprawling fortress-like estate. Cameras tracked their every move. Armed guards walked the perimeter with intimidatingly large dogs. Alice was escorted through an opulent marble foyer, past priceless works of art, and into a dark mahogany-paneled study that smelled of rich tobacco, old books, and expensive bourbon. Vincent Moretti sat behind a massive desk. In the daylight, he was even more striking. He had the rugged, sharp-angled face of a classical Roman statue, marred only by a faint silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His dark eyes locked onto hers the moment she entered. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a leather wing-back chair. Alice remained standing. "Whatever this is, I want no part of it. I helped your daughter, you paid me, we're done." Vincent leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Alice Hayes, 28, top of your class in the accelerated physical therapy program at Northwestern. Dropped out 6 credits shy of your doctorate because your deadbeat ex-husband, a low-level grifter, ran off with your savings, leaving you with a newborn with chronic severe asthma." Alice's blood ran cold. "You investigated me." "I investigate everyone who touches my blood," Vincent said smoothly. "My daughter's name is Lily. 2 years ago, a rival family placed a car bomb under my vehicle. I survived. My wife did not. Lily was thrown from the wreckage. Her spine was bruised, severing key neural pathways. Since then, she's been in agonizing pain, suffering from the spasticity you witnessed. She hasn't spoken a single word since the day her mother died." Vincent stood up slowly, walking around the desk. His towering presence made Alice feel incredibly small. "I have flown in the best neurologists from Geneva, Tokyo, and Boston. None of them have been able to stop her episodes without heavily medicating her into a comatose state. You stopped it in 3 minutes in a filthy clinic with your bare hands." "It's a specialized myofascial release technique," Alice said defensively. "It's not magic. It requires continuous daily therapy." "Exactly." Vincent stopped inches from her. "Which is why you are coming to work for me." "I am not a licensed doctor. I work at a walk-in clinic." "I do not care about pieces of paper," Vincent retorted sharply. "I care about results. I am offering you $50,000 a month, tax-free. You and your son will live here on the estate in the guest wing. He will have access to my private medical staff, the best pediatric pulmonologists money can buy. Your debts will be wiped out today." Alice stared at him, her mind spinning. $50,000 a month, top-tier doctors for Leo. It was a lifeline thrown from the devil himself. "And what is the catch?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincent leaned in his scent, a mix of cedarwood and danger enveloping her. "The catch is that you belong to the Moretti family now. You will live under my security protocols. You do not leave the estate without my guards. You do not discuss my business. If you betray my trust or if you bring harm to my daughter." His eyes darkened to pitch black. "There isn't a place on this earth I won't find you." It was a golden cage, a contract with a monster. But as Alice pictured Leo's pale face and the agonizing sound of his cough, the choice had already been made. A mother will walk through the fires of hell if it means keeping her child safe. "I need my son's medical wing set up by tomorrow," Alice said, raising her chin to meet his gaze directly. "And you will never, ever threaten me in front of him." A flicker of genuine surprise and perhaps a shadow of respect crossed Vincent's hardened face. "Deal," he said softly. Moving into the Moretti estate felt like stepping onto another planet. Alice and Leo were given a suite of rooms that were larger than the entire apartment building they used to live in. The walls were adorned with silk wallpaper, the beds felt like clouds, and a private chef prepared meals that made Leo's eyes widen in absolute wonder. True to his word, Vincent had converted an adjacent room into a state-of-the-art medical suite for Leo, complete with air purifiers, oxygen tanks, and a live-in respiratory nurse who reported directly to Alice. For the first time in 5 years, Alice slept through the night without listening for her son's wheezing. But the luxury came with a suffocating weight. Armed guards stood at the end of their hallway. Black SUVs constantly came and went from the driveway. And then there was Lily. On her second day, Alice was escorted to the east wing of the manor. Lily's room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. It looked like a sterile, high-end hospital ward. White walls, beige curtains drawn tightly shut against the sun, the persistent beep of medical monitors. Lily sat in a high-tech motorized wheelchair in the center of the room. She was painfully thin, her dark hair limp, her eyes completely devoid of life. She stared at the wall, completely ignoring Alice's entrance. "Hello, Lily," Alice said warmly, stepping into the room. "I'm Alice. I'm going to be working with you." No response, not even a blink. Alice sighed. "First things first. Let's get rid of this gloom." She walked over and yanked the heavy curtains open, flooding the room with bright golden afternoon sunlight. A sharp intake of breath came from the doorway. Alice turned to see Vincent standing there, his jaw tight. "She prefers the dark," he said, his voice a low warning. "She is a child, Mr. Moretti. Children need sunlight to synthesize vitamin D for muscle recovery. And more importantly, they need it so they don't feel like they are buried alive," Alice challenged, refusing to back down. "If I am in charge of her therapy, I am in charge of her environment. Are we clear?" The guards behind Vincent shifted uncomfortably, expecting their boss to explode. Instead, Vincent stared at Alice for a long, tense moment. The corner of his mouth twitched upward by a millimeter. He turned on his heel and left without a word. The real work began. It was grueling, heartbreaking, and violently physical. Alice refused to treat Lily like a fragile porcelain doll. She initiated an aggressive regimen of hydrotherapy in the estate's massive indoor pool. She would hold Lily in the warm water, supporting her weight while gently forcing her atrophied limbs to move against the water's resistance. Lily fought her, not with words, but with a terrifying silent resistance. She would thrash cries soundlessly, and sometimes during the painful deep tissue massages, she would look at Alice with absolute hatred. Alice absorbed it all, speaking to her in a soothing, constant stream of chatter, telling her stories, singing off-key pop songs, never once showing pity. Pity was poison. 3 weeks into the routine, the estate felt a little less like a prison and more like a strange, highly militarized home. Leo had begun to thrive, his cheeks taking on a rosy hue. One afternoon, Alice decided to break the ultimate rule. She brought Leo to the pool during Lily's therapy session. Alice, the boss, said no unauthorized personnel near the girl. Lorenzo, the massive guard assigned to watch them, protested. "He's 5, Lorenzo. What's he going to do aggressively color outside the lines?" Alice fired back, already lifting Lily into the shallow end. Leo sat on the edge of the pool, dangling his legs in the water. He was holding a brightly colored plastic submarine. He looked at Lily, who was glaring at the water, her shoulders hunched. "Hi," Leo said brightly. "I'm Leo. My mom says you're super strong." Lily ignored him, staring blankly ahead. My submarine is broken, Leo continued, unbothered. It won't sink, it just floats. Submarines are supposed to sink right, otherwise it's just a really fat boat. Alice paused her massage on Lily's shoulder, watching. Lily blinked. She looked slowly from the water up to Leo's earnest face and then to the plastic toy. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, her right hand, the hand that had been clenched into a fist for 2 years, began to tremble. Her fingers uncurled. She reached out, hovering her hand over the water, and weakly pushed the top of the submarine down. It bobbed under the surface for a second before popping back up. A tiny, microscopic, barely there smile touched the corner of Lily's lips. Leo giggled. "Do it again." Lily's throat worked, swallowing hard. Her lips parted. The sound was raspy, unused, and incredibly soft, but in the echoing chamber of the pool room, it sounded like a gunshot. Again. Alice let out a choked gasp, tears instantly springing to her eyes. She looked up. Standing on the second-floor balcony overlooking the pool shrouded in the shadows was Vincent. His hands were gripping the iron railing so tightly his knuckles were white. He was staring at his daughter, his eyes shining with an emotion that the ruthless Mafia boss had long thought dead. For a fleeting second, his gaze shifted from his daughter to Alice. The icy, impenetrable wall between them fractured. In that look, there was raw, unfiltered gratitude and a dangerous, burning intensity that made Alice's breath hitch. But the miracle was fragile, and the world they lived in was built on violence. Later that evening, as Alice was tucking Leo into bed, the heavy oak door of her suite was thrown open. Vincent stood there, flanked by Lorenzo and 3 other heavily armed men. The soft, grateful father from the balcony was gone. The ruthless syndicate boss had returned, and he looked ready to kill. In his hand, he held a black unmarked box. Inside rested a single bloody white rose and a pristine handwritten note on heavy cardstock. Vincent handed the note to Alice. His voice was a dead hollow sound. "The Marzano family." Alice looked down at the elegant cursive handwriting. The blood drained from her face as she read the words, "The boss's armor has a crack. A pretty nurse and her little boy. Such a shame accidents happen so easily to children." Alice looked up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The golden cage had just turned into a battlefield, and she and her son were placed squarely on the front lines. "Pack a bag," Vincent ordered, pulling a heavy matte black pistol from his shoulder holster and chambering a round with a terrifying clack. "We are going to ground." The evacuation was a masterclass in organized, terrifying chaos. Within 20 minutes of the bloody rose being delivered, Alice found herself and Leo bundled into the back of a heavily armored SUV, speeding through the torrential Chicago rain. Vincent rode in the passenger seat, barking encrypted orders into a satellite phone. His voice was a low mechanical hum of pure strategy, devoid of the emotional father who had stood on the balcony just hours before. They didn't go to an airport. They drove to a private unmarked helipad on the outskirts of the city. A matte black Sikorsky helicopter was already blade spinning, waiting to swallow them up. "Mommy, are we going to see Batman?" Leo yelled over the deafening roar of the rotors as Lorenzo strapped a set of heavy noise-canceling headphones over the boy's ears. Alice forced a reassuring smile, her hands trembling as she secured her own harness. "Something like that, baby. We're going on a secret adventure." She glanced across the narrow cabin. Lily was strapped into a specialized medical transport seat, her eyes wide and terrified in the dim red tactical lighting. Alice unbuckled her own harness just enough to lean forward and firmly grasp the little girl's trembling hand, squeezing it twice. Lily didn't pull away. 2 hours later, they touched down in the pitch-black wilderness. The biting, freezing wind of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan whipped through Alice's thin jacket the moment the doors opened. They were hurried into waiting trucks and driven up a steep, winding mountain road until they reached the safe house. It was less of a house and more of a billionaire's doomsday bunker, disguised as a luxurious hunting lodge. Nestled on the cliffs overlooking the churning, icy black waters of Lake Superior, the property was surrounded by a 10-foot electrified fence and guarded by men patrolling with thermal optics. Once inside the massive timber-framed living room, the adrenaline finally left Alice's system, leaving her utterly exhausted. Leo had fallen asleep against Lorenzo's massive shoulder. "Take the boy to the West Wing bedroom," Vincent ordered Lorenzo. He turned to Alice, his dark eyes scanning her pale face. "You and Lily will take the adjoining suites. The perimeter is secure. No one knows we are here. You are safe." "Safe?" Alice let out a breathless, hollow laugh, the shock finally cracking her composure. "You call this safe? We just fled in a military helicopter because someone threatened to murder my 5-year-old son to get to you." The guards in the room stiffened, hands dropping to their sides. No one raised their voice to the head of the Moretti syndicate. Vincent stepped forward, invading her space, his towering frame forcing her to tilt her head up. "I warned you," he said, his voice a dangerous velvet whisper. "I told you the day we met that you belong to the family now, and this family has enemies. The Marzanos are animals led by an old paranoid fool named Carmine. But they will not touch a single hair on your head, Alice, or your son's." "You can't guarantee that," she whispered, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "I can," Vincent replied, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her eyes again. "Because if they try, I will burn Chicago to the ground and dance in the ashes. Now get some sleep. We have a war to manage tomorrow." The next 3 days in the lodge were suffocating. The isolation was absolute. But Alice refused to let fear dictate her routine. If they were trapped in this gilded fortress, she was going to use the time. She demanded Lorenzo construct makeshift parallel bars out of heavy pine logs in the lodge's basement. "Push, Lily! Push against my hands!" Alice instructed on the 4th afternoon, kneeling on the cold concrete floor. Lily was standing, her small hands gripping the wooden rails, her legs trembling violently as she tried to bear her own weight. Sweat beaded on the little girl's forehead. The spasticity was trying to lock her muscles, but Alice's daily deep tissue manipulation had loosened the damaged neural pathways. "I can't," Lily rasped. Her voice was still gravelly, but she was using it more every day. "Yes, you can," Alice said firmly, refusing to coddle her. "Your brain is a computer, Lily. Right now it has a virus. We are reprogramming it. One step. Show me one step." Lily gritted her teeth, a fierce, almost terrifying determination crossing her face, a mirror image of her father's signature scowl. She shifted her weight, dragged her right foot forward, and planted it. "Good girl!" Alice cheered, catching the child as her knees finally buckled, hugging her tight against her chest. "You did it. I am so incredibly proud of you." A slow clapping echoed from the top of the basement stairs. Vincent descended, dressed in a heavy charcoal sweater, looking less like a mob boss and more like a rugged mountain recluse. "Incredible," he murmured, his eyes fixed on his daughter. "She has the stubbornness of a mule," Alice said, brushing Lily's hair back. "I wonder where she gets it." Vincent offered a rare, genuine smile that transformed his face, making Alice's heart perform a strange, unwanted flutter in her chest. "Take her upstairs to rest," he told Lorenzo, who had been standing guard in the corner. When they were alone, the silence in the basement grew heavy. Vincent walked over to the makeshift parallel bars, running a hand over the rough wood. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, Alice." "I don't want your money, Vincent. I just want my son to survive." He looked at her, his expression softening into something dangerously vulnerable. "My wife, Sophia, she was the collateral damage of my ambition. The day she died, a part of me went into the ground with her. I looked at Lily, paralyzed and broken, and all I saw was my own failure as a protector. I shut down. I became the monster everyone expects the head of the Moretti family to be." He stepped closer, the scent of wood smoke and expensive cologne washing over her. "But you crashed into my world like a hurricane. You aren't afraid of me. You yell at my men. You force the light into the dark. Alice swallowed hard, her back pressed against the cold concrete wall. "Vincent!" He reached out his rough thumb, gently brushing a stray curl away from her cheek. The touch sent a shock wave of electricity straight down her spine. "I will not let the dark touch you, Alice. I swear it on my life." For a moment, neither of them breathed. The space between them evaporated. Alice could feel the heat radiating off him, drawing her in. She tilted her face up, entirely captivated by the gravity of the man standing before her. But before the moment could shatter, the piercing, shrill shriek of the perimeter alarm tore through the lodge. The romantic tension vanished instantly, replaced by the icy grip of adrenaline. Vincent's demeanor shifted in a nanosecond. He drew his weapon, his eyes going dead and flat. "Move to the panic room. Now!" he roared, grabbing Alice's arm and shoving her toward the stairs. Gunfire erupted outside, the heavy rhythmic thud of automatic weapons tearing through the tranquil forest. The Marzanos hadn't just found them. They had brought an army. Alice scrambled up the stairs, her heart hammering in her throat. She sprinted down the main hallway toward the west wing. "Leo, Lily!" she screamed. Lorenzo was already hauling Leo out of bed, holding the boy like a football under one arm, while firing his sidearm through the shattered glass of the bedroom window with the other. Glass rained down like deadly diamonds. "Mommy!" Leo shrieked, terrified by the deafening noise. I've got him, get the girl." Lorenzo bellowed over the roar of a breaching charge exploding against the front doors of the lodge. Alice ducked low, running to the adjoining room. She grabbed Lily from the bed, wrapping the child's arms around her neck, and hoisted her up. The sheer weight of the girl and the panic made Alice's legs burn, but she ran following Lorenzo down the secondary hallway toward the reinforced steel door of the safe room. The lodge was a war zone. Drywall exploded into white dust as bullets tore through the structure. Alice saw 3 men in white winter camouflage sweeping through the living room, firing relentlessly. Vincent and 2 of his top enforcers, Matteo and Luca, were pinned behind the massive stone fireplace, returning fire with lethal precision. "Get in!" Lorenzo shoved Alice, Leo, and Lily into the dimly lit concrete-walled safe room. Just as he was about to pull the heavy steel door shut, a stray bullet tore through the air, catching Matteo in the neck as he tried to fall back to their position. Matteo collapsed, blood spraying in a horrific crimson arc against the white wall. "Matteo!" Vincent yelled, laying down heavy cover fire. Lorenzo grabbed Matteo by the collar of his tactical vest and dragged him brutally across the floor and into the safe room, slamming the heavy steel door shut and locking the deadbolts. The sudden silence inside the room was almost as deafening as the gunfire outside. "He's hit an artery." Lorenzo panicked, pressing his massive hands against Matteo's neck. The blood was pulsing out in rhythmic, terrifying spurts. Matteo's face was turning the color of wet ash. "Move!" Alice shoved Lorenzo out of the way. The doctoring instincts ingrained in her took over entirely, overriding her terror. She dropped to her knees in the pool of blood. She didn't have her clinic tools. She didn't have hemostatic gauze. "Lorenzo, give me your belt, now," she commanded. Lorenzo fumbled and yanked off his heavy leather belt. Alice grabbed it, looping it under Matteo's armpit and over his opposite shoulder to create a makeshift tourniquet for the subclavian artery, pulling it as tight as her arms would allow. "It's the external jugular, not the carotid, thank God," Alice muttered rapidly, her hands slick with blood. "I need pressure, direct localized pressure. Do we have a medical kit in here?" "Wall cabinet," Lorenzo pointed. Alice ripped it open. It was a trauma kit. She grabbed a pair of forceps and a wad of quick clot gauze. She returned to Matteo, who was now unconscious, his breathing shallow and erratic. "Hold his head still," she ordered Lorenzo. She took a deep breath, fighting down the bile rising in her throat, and shoved the chemically treated gauze directly into the gaping wound, packing it deep into the laceration to plug the torn vessel, then clamped it with the forceps. She held it there, her entire body weight pressing down on her hands. 5 agonizing minutes passed as the heavy thuds of bullets continued to ring against the steel door outside. She focused purely on Mateo's chest, watching the rise and fall. The bleeding slowed, then finally stopped. "You saved his life," Lorenzo whispered, staring at Alice with a look of profound awe. Alice slumped back against the concrete wall, her hands stained crimson up to the wrists. She looked over at the corner. Leo was holding Lily's hand, both children shaking uncontrollably. Alice crawled over to them, pulling them both into a tight embrace, ignoring the blood transferring to their clothes. They stayed in that dark, cold room for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the gunfire ceased.